is this, yeah, this is like more like on oppression type stuff. So this is going to get a little more into material reality, but in a way that kind of shows exactly what's lacking in his analysis. And this is from 2017, over 1 million views. So again, if we're assessing his malignancy,
I'm actually surprised. I figured he'd be in the tens of millions by now.
I'm sure many are, but for the purposes of like what we want to use, like for this video, these videos were probably more appropriate. But he definitely has videos that are like approaching those numbers. Definitely.
It's a big problem here. The problem is it's true. You're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed, you're oppressed. God only knows why. Maybe you're too short, or you're not as beautiful as you could be, or your grandparent was a serf, likely, because almost everybody's great-grandparent was. It's like, and you're not as smart as you could be, and you have a sick relative, and you have your own physical problems, and it's like, frankly, you're a mess. And you're oppressed in every possible way, including your ancestry and your biology, and the entire sum of human history has conspired to produce.
Yeah, look at those idiots just laughing.
With all your individual pathological problems. It's like, yes, true. Okay, but the problem is that it is true. And so if you take the oppressed, you have to fractionate them. It's like, you're a woman. Yeah, okay. Well, I'm a black woman. Well, I'm a black woman who has 2 children. Well, I'm a black woman who has 2 children, and one of them isn't very healthy. And then, well, I'm a Hispanic woman, and I have a genius son who doesn't have any money so that he can't go to university. And, I had a hell of a time getting across the border. It was really hard on me to get my citizenship. My husband is an alcoholic brute. It's like, well, yeah, that sucks too. And so, so let's fix all your oppression. And we'll take every single thing into account, and then we'll fix yours too. We'll take every single thing into account. It's like, no, you won't, because you can't. You can't. It is technically impossible. First of all, you can't even list all the ways that...
All right. So like what jumps out here is like, okay, so even if we were to concede that it's technically impossible to fix every single oppression that exists right now, overnight or whatever, kind of straw man that he's setting up, you could reduce them as much as you possibly can. This reminds me of this, there's this guy that I know, this Jewish guy. We meet up once every year or so to discuss Israel-Palestine and lose our minds on each other and just argue. And recently we met up, and he was making the point that if you have different groups that are have like different levels of oppression, at what point do you stop sort of supporting them? At what point do you say, okay, well, we've done what technically we're able to do and what technically we ought to do. Now you're on your own. And my answer is the following. Historically, and up to this day, the answer is we never, ever, ever stop. Because let's say, for example, that you have, some kind of event that happens overnight, and overnight the mortality, or rather the lifespan of Black Americans or Jewish Americans or whatever, drops by 50%. Isn't it up to the state and collectively just all of society to do everything within their power to reduce that overnight change from 50% back to parity at a minimum? The answer, I think most people would say, is yes. And we constantly go around in life playing whack-a-mole with new forms of oppression, new forms of unfairness. I think, in the next century, we'll probably see, people that are physically attractive, like their privileges little by little being whittled away with, because, so much of life is unearned privilege, right?
Let me contextualize this outside of this. It reminds me of the anti-evolutionist argument that an eye couldn't have developed all by itself because it wouldn't serve any purpose. Yet eyes have developed many times over. And of course, you don't go from having no eyes. You go from photoreceptor cells on the skin to eyes in maybe 100 to 500 to 1,000 evolutionary steps. But of course, each step gets you a little closer and better, and that's what makes it. But if you have 50% of the vision of a great eye, a human eyeball, that's better than having 25 or 10%. He lives in such a black and white world; it's either all or nothing, and that's the same kind of faulty logic. Because if someone is near the point of death and they're suffering from 7 diseases, and you can give them a shot that gets them that they're going to live, but live poorly, but only have 2 main diseases, wouldn't you do that? You're never going to get him out of the wheelchair, let's say, if one of the diseases is polio. You're never going to. Isn't it better, though, that someone has less disease? We're either going to have someone who's so far gone that they're going to be dead in 3 days, or we can make you, a paraplegic that will otherwise live a good life. Being a paraplegic is better than being dead, but that kind of logic does not figure into his world. Okay.
And it's also self-contradictory, right? Because he makes a lot of videos, like when we're going to get into the next video is going to be like worldwide poverty, right? He's constantly making the claim that over time humanity is improving, right? People, even if we have greater numbers of people in poverty now, the proportion is going down. And I do believe that, within the next few centuries, we probably will not have something like we see today, which is like extreme poverty. That's probably not going to exist. But if what he's saying about that is correct, right? If we were to make that concession, well, doesn't it stand to reason that what I said earlier is in fact how society works? We constantly play whack-a-mole with these problems until we reduce them as much as we possibly can. Like what he doesn't get is, or rather, maybe he does get it, but what his fans don't get is his function, right? In this world, right? In this kind of niche that he fills intellectually is, let us, while pretending like we're not doing it, let us do everything within our power to keep the status quo as is. If you want to make this kind of change, if you want to make that kind of change, don't do it. If you want to make a change to the tax code and do some sort of redistribution scheme, don't do it, right? It's all meant for status quo thinking. And, Steven Pinker, obviously, he falls into this as well. I did that show in Steven Pinker. It was like Artifact number 13, I believe it was. But anyway, and, he's fulfilling this niche really, really well. He's playing these word games nonstop. And you see these, people in the audience, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't say this, but they just look so dumb and they're just laughing at things that aren't fucking funny. And you could always tell, I think you could always gauge a person's level of intelligence to the extent that he or she laughs at things that clearly have no humor whatsoever. But anyway.
That you're oppressed. Second, how are you going to weight them? Third, who's going to decide? And that's the bloody thing. Who's going to decide? That's the thing. Well, what's the answer in the West? It's like in free markets. Oh yeah, Christ will never be able to solve this problem. No one can solve it. What are we going to do about that? We're going to outsource it to the marketplace. You're going to take your sorry, pathetic being and you're going to try to offer me something that maybe I want. And I'm going to take my sorry, pathetic being and I'm going to say, well, all things considered.
And he's trying to create this parity between himself and these other four. What fucking oppression does this guy face? It's just insanity, right? He's trying to create this equality between the two and essentially saying that, well, because I can't do it for myself and I can't do it for you, we're not even going to try, is really what this comes down to, right? So much of it.
As well as I can understand them, maybe I could give you this much money, which is actually a promise, for that thing. And you've packed all of your damn oppression into the price. And I've packed all my oppression into the willingness to pay it. And that solution sucks. It's a bad solution. But compared to every other solution, man, it's why 10% of us have freedom. And so there's a tremendous illogic at the bottom of this. It's like...
Where did he get this calculus? I mean...
Yeah. It's just, it's out of his ass. It sounds good, right? That's all it comes down to.
This is one of the reasons that I try to avoid when I argue with people, whether it's about Wilt Chamberlain or basketball or whether it's something a little bit more socially relevant. I try to avoid just picking out these kinds of statistical kind of things because statistics lie all the time. He's what? I think a year or two older than me, so he's probably pushing 60. He's born and raised in Canada. He's a white male. If he wasn't raised in Toronto, there's a good chance that he's before he became a professor, he probably knew 11 non-white people in his life.
Yeah.
What kind of oppression could he have? He doesn't have to be a millionaire, but I mean, what kind of oppression did he have? Is he Jewish? Is Peterson Jewish? I don't think so.
No. And yeah, this is kind of, you sort of notice this even at the beginning, the examples that he was giving right? They tend to be like such kind of, in most of those examples rather, they tend to be like really, really low stakes, right? He's constantly making light of this idea of oppression, even though he pays lip service to the idea that, it's actually, it's so terrible and profound, blah, blah, blah. He's constantly making light of it when it comes to the point of the dialectic where, logically it would start to matter, right? At that point, he wants it to not matter, right? And he sets up the arguments to work precisely in that way.
You have to fractionate the oppressed all the way down to the level of the individual.
But what if the individuals eventually form into a group that follow the same exact patterns of oppression and statistically follow enough patterns that you could create very good predictions in terms of how the average in this population would play out? Like, this is literally what we're talking about, right? This is what it comes down to, right? Like, there is oppression at the level of the individual, but eventually they aggregate into a group, right? Oppression does not merely fall upon a person. It's felt by one person. But when we're talking about policies, when we're talking about making any kind of changes that matter, it's always going to be the group dynamic, because the averages is ultimately what shapes society, right? It's not the choice of a person.
And this gets to the heart of the whole critical race theory thing, because no one in critical race theory who wants to just acknowledge it is saying that every black person has to end up, out of poverty. Every black person has to have a good marriage and family values and whatnot. But it's about recognizing the things that have been done and are still being done to certain groups: blacks, Native Americans, Hispanics, gays, whatever it might be, and alleviating some of that to try to balance the scales. This is a typical of someone who has had the scales in his favor, but goddamn, if we balance them a little bit, we're taking something away. Even if there's nothing materially taking away, percentage-wise, in their calculus, if someone comes up to them, they didn't earn it. It's like that fellow I said who was a boss. I worked hard for my what all I have. Other people didn't. I can guarantee you, not you, Alex, not that boss of mine, not me, and not Peterson. Not one of us, and I'm a goddamn hard worker, not one of us has ever worked a single day as hard as one day in the South Carolina sun in 1840 as a slave.
Yes. And, for that reason, whenever people say stuff like, I've earned it, I don't think there's like pretty much anyone living in the United States of America that has earned anything, right? Because the further that you go, like to some of these places where you got to work like 16 hours a day just to survive, right? Yeah. You get closer and closer to this idea of earning. And of course, the issue there is not even so much whether or not they earned it. They're not getting what they deserve, right? So they've earned a lot more than what they're getting. And the crazy part about all this is, when you think of even modern conceptions of like what conservatives would claim today to be like their philosophy on life, a bedrock principle even today would be something like, we can't have unequal consequences for equal behavior, right? That is a bedrock conservative philosophical principle. And yet all in society, all the time, we get unequal consequences for equal behavior. And the way that it works is as follows. If you are born into a bad situation, let's say, as a group, right? Black person, Native American, you're going to be born statistically into a group average that is not as good in terms of all kinds of outcomes compared to a white person. That's just a fact. On the individual level, what this means is you constantly have to work harder to get the same thing that other people that don't have the same obstacles end up getting. So we get again and again in society unequal consequences for identical behaviors. A girl that's 15 years old that's able to go get an abortion versus a girl that's 15 years old that's not able to get an abortion because she can't afford it or because it's too far away, they're going to have very different life outcomes, right? If you're able to be 15, get rid of a pregnancy, go on to college and live a normal life versus You're 15, maybe you have to drop out of high school and suddenly, everything in your life changes. Again, but these are identical behaviors, unprotected sex, broken condom, whatever you want to call it, but unequal consequences. This ought to be a bedrock principle, but because this isn't even, what Peterson believes, right? He doesn't really believe in this stuff. He's there to fulfill a status quo kind of thinking. So he's not even, ironically, that past video, be honest with yourself. He's not being honest with his principles even here, and you could tell.
Even to get more pointedly, that girl, that 15-year-old girl that can't afford to get the abortion, she's going to have different consequences than the 15-year-old boy that knocked her up. Because the boy can walk away, the boy can pay her off, the boy can for years demand this, that, or that. She's the one who's going to have to carry the fetus for 9 months. She's the one that's either going to be stuck in poverty, as we know some people have done that. She's the one that's going to have to make the choice to give the kid up for adoption or not him. So even there, there's unequal choices. But this is these conservative values that someone like him, if you read between the lines, he's never going to be one of these people. He's not going to be a Mitch McConnell type. He's not going to be one of the Rand Paul types. But he is in the same vein. He's just a slicker, more intelligent, more gussied up version of a Rand Paul.
Yeah, and someone that I think all politicians in some level, like people that follow like the inner workings of politicians in some ways, they're kind of like the people that think they're too smart for like Justin Bieber celebrity gossip or whatever the fuck, right? This is all kind of and for Peterson, right? To him, it's like, well, I don't want to be a politician, but I want to be this kind of cultural warrior, right? I don't want to deal with the day-to-day bullshit of politics, but I want the spotlight on me. Right. I am narcissistic in that way. I have nothing. And the narcissism comes through not even because you necessarily won the limelight, but because you have nothing to contribute. Right. You could get the limelight if you've earned it. That's fine. Right. That's not narcissism. Right. That's recognizing, hey, I did something worthwhile. Yeah. Give me some fucking attention. Give me what I deserve. That's fine. But this isn't what's going on. Right. So.
Well, that's what the West figured out. There's a couple of figures who are at the mythological roots of our culture. And people get upset with me because I bring in religious themes, but I understand some things about mythology and religion. And it's not an accident that the axiomatic Western individual is someone who was unfairly nailed to a cross and tortured. It's like, yes, right, exactly. So what do you do about that? Well, I thought about that for a long time too. It's like, well, you don't get together in a damn mob, because all that does is allow you to be as horrible as you could possibly imagine and suffer from none of the consequences. That's a bad idea. So how about we don't do that? Well, there's a deep idea in the West too. It's like, pick up your damn suffering and bear it.
Like, so he essentially says all these other things that people might want to do, such as taxing the rich, such as, ameliorating climate change in some way so you don't have a fucking, 3 billion refugees, within half a century. What you have to do instead is you have to bear your suffering. If you're one of those refugees, you have to bear your suffering. And it's very easy, again, for him to say, because as you point out, there's nothing for him to bear other than a near-death experience because he got hopped up on fucking drugs, right? He has nothing else to bear. Right? Like this is exactly his function. How can we, in this capitalist superstructure, how can we serve as the cog in this machine that tells people, do not get together, do not make demands, do not try for any kind of redistribution, but simply be proud of your suffering and bear it and walk with dignity, right?
Well, someone like him wouldn't even acknowledge. He probably doesn't even know. I've seen, not in any of these videos we have, but I know I've seen when he talks about socioeconomics and whatnot. I don't think he even realizes that when people talk about redistribution in a socialist context, that they're really talking about a second redistribution, because the first redistribution was from the masses upward.
Exactly. It's always been that way. It's always been bottom up redistribution. The second, however, you try to say, well, let's now redistribute in the other direction. Suddenly that's impossible. And of course, it's like, well, no shit. Those with all the power would indeed say, after getting everything at the top, no, it's no longer possible. After proving that it's possible from the bottom up, now we can't do it the other direction. Right. So, yeah, and that's exactly, you know, that's part of this whole conservative grift.
And try to be a good person so you don't make it worse.
You know, imagine saying that, like, literally, this is exactly what people told black people 50, 60, 100 years ago. Don't make it worse for you. Don't get in a mob. Don't get together. What are you you're going to do a fucking slave rebellion? Don't make it worse for yourself. Accept accept the slavery.
Look at his body posture. He's walking around, and I almost think he's going to go up and stamp his feet like a little infant. I mean, he's on the verge of a shit fit right here.
Yeah, exactly. He is.
Well, that's a truth. You know, I read a lot about
Gee willikers,
terrible things that people have done to each other. You just cannot even imagine it.
Now he's drawing the people in. I feel your pain.
So you don't want to be someone like that. Now, do you have a reason to be? Yes. You have lots of reasons to be. God, there's reasons to be resentful about your existence. Everyone you know is going to die. You know, you too. And there's going to be a fair bit of pain along the way. And lots of it's going to be unfair. It's like, yeah, no wonder you're resentful. It's like, act it out and see what happens. You make everything you're complaining about infinitely worse. There's this idea that...
Just imagine that. How is this considered like intellectual advice? Like, it's literally, don't complain about your status in society, even if it's unfair. That's not even a conservative principle anymore. This is like the most extreme right-wing radicalism imaginable.
And who complains the most in society? They say the far left, the far right. Yeah. I won't even wear a mask to protect my fellow neighbor. I thought in the 10 Commandments, it's treat others as you'd want to, or is that the goal? Treat others as you'd like to be treated, the golden rule. I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm not going to get vaccinated. If you die, fuck you.
Yeah.
Hell is a bottomless pit, and that's because no matter how bad it is, some stupid son of a bitch like you could figure out a way to make it a lot worse. So you think, well, what do you do about that? Well, you accept it. That's what life is like. It's suffering. That's what the religious people have always said. Life is suffering. Yes. Well, who wants to admit that? Well, just think about it. Well, so what do you do in the face of that suffering?
You've got stomach cancer. What do you want, an operation? Just die. Decrease the surplus population.
Start with yourself.
The Ebenezer
What good are you? Get yourself together, for Christ's sake, so that when your father dies, you're not whining away in a corner and you can help plan the funeral. And you can stand
University
up
of Toronto
so
presents a Christmas Carol starring Jordan B. Peterson.
Did you hear this? Like, this is such fucking hypocrisy given what transpired. Just listen to this.
Away in a corner and you can help plan the funeral. And you can stand up solidly so that people can rely on you. That's better.
What about his fucking wife? What about his addiction? What about his family that was depending on him? What about all this other shit? He's fucking like he's in a goddamn coma, almost dead, somewhere in some fucking Russian, a prison hospital of some sort, or whatever it was. And he's doling out all this life advice, and it will be fine because this was years ago, but he's not squaring with this part of his reality today. He's not able to be honest with his fans. He's giving out such hypocritical advice. He's exactly... And the reason why he's talking about other people's weakness and other people's anguish and other people's bear it. He's just projecting everything that he fears within himself. He fears that when it really comes down to it, he's not going to be able to bear it. And guess what? He fucking didn't. He got hopped up on drugs and he almost killed himself in the process. That's a fact. Okay. He wasn't able to bear it. He's exactly the kind of projection of weakness that he's imagining everyone else that is not in his position of power is. He's exactly that, which is why he's in a near tantrum here in the speech, right? Because he feels this about himself. It's so obvious.
The two things that I take away from this video, we're halfway through it. I don't know if you want to go through it anymore, but the first video, we see that is sort of the benign stylism there, because we see the kid or whoever made that video. That we're getting, that's the Oprah soft time.
Yeah.
Here, this video doesn't have those images, but when we see those three stooges sitting on the left there, and they're hiding or trying to hide their Snickers, the one guy isn't even really trying. You get the sense of this is the way these people really feel. That, you know, I've got mine, you've got yours. Fuck you, ha 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 ha. I'm better than you. I mean, there's not even. I mean, if you really analyze this, like we're doing, how could you? This is what it inspires: cliched videos, images in the first, and a bunch of stooges sitting on the side laughing at everyone who's not white and male.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the last 5 minutes, we don't have to go through it, but in the last 5 minutes, he does say something like, the solution to all this is as follows, right? Which is kind of like a rehash of what he already said, which is transcend. Make the suffering less, right? That's the verbatim quote. Transcend, make the suffering less, right? Don't be a bad person. Don't be evil. Transcend, make the suffering less. The problem with that advice, right, to the extent that it could even be construed as advice, is as follows. So he's a psychologist. He should understand what make the suffering less actually looks like in places with the most suffering. If you go to many places in the United States of America, there are tons of neighborhoods where the state has no reach. We're going to talk about this later when we talk about like police brutality. The state has no reach. There is a de facto state of anarchy, a state of nature. And in that situation, to make your suffering less means I can at any given second be a victim. And the only way in a state of nature for me not to be a victim is I have to be a parasite. I have to be the aggressor. I have to be the one that's on top, because if I'm not on top, I'm going to be trampled upon. So ironically, this advice that he's doling out that he thinks is good advice to those people that need it the most, it's nothing more than a recipe for being a parasite, right? It's a recipe for being a predator upon your neighbors, right? Because there's no way around it. If there is no state reach, if there is no redistribution, if there is no improvement of material conditions, you cannot have anything other than a de facto state of nature, a state of anarchy where predation is the norm. And the way that you avoid feeling like you're going to be trampled or feeling this kind of, prenatal pain that you carry before birth, during birth, after birth, whatever, is by trampling upon others. This thing that he claims that he wants to avoid, he's giving you exactly how to make it worse and worse and worse.
And someone like him, there's only two things that watching even just these two videos so far is that either he knows what he's saying is bullshit, and therefore he's a grifter, or he doesn't know what he's saying, and the effects, the ramifications of what he's saying, and he's an idiot. So he's either a grifter or an idiot. Which is worse?
Yeah, exactly. I think, and it is an open question, right? He definitely is acting in many places. We know that there's a line between the kinds of academic work that he was interested in back in the day and the kinds of interviews that he gave, like, decade and a half, 2 decades ago, versus who he has become now, right? And there's other facts, like, we know that he has not been honest with his audience about his recent troubles. So, putting all this stuff together, I definitely lean on grifter, right? But he is good at what he does in that sense.